Hi, everybody. This is Jan Erickson speaking. I'm a co-president of the Clearinghouse on Women's Issues, and we are meeting today to discuss a very urgent subject. Probably don't need to remind you that June 24th is the very inauspicious third anniversary of the Dobbs decision by our Supreme Court of the United States. So keep that in mind as we listen to our esteemed speakers. They are really at the top of their game in understanding what's going on in Congress and with the administration on reproductive rights, and have some great ideas, I hope, to suggest how we can fight back effectively. I'm going to also mention that after each speaker, who will talk for about 15 to 20 minutes, that we will take your questions, but please put those in the chat. Don't offer them in person online. We really need to call on you to have that question answered. So thank you for your cooperation. Understanding and counteracting threats to reproductive rights couldn't be more appropriate for today. And the news about what's happening nationwide on reproductive rights, access, and care is just appalling. The Senate Republicans could vote before the end of the week to kick 14 million Americans off their health care under Medicaid and to federally defund Planned Parenthood. As a result, if that happens, more than 300 clinics and health centers across the country would have to close their doors. And it's estimated that more than 1,000 counties would not have a single OB/GYN or maternal care specialist as a result. This couldn't be a worse situation for so many communities who really need to have expert care. We're hearing so many stories come forward about how women are suffering, and this really has to stop. In the 3 years to this day that Roe was overturned, nearly 24 states have enacted extreme abortion restrictions, if not outright bans. And most of them don't have a single doctor or OB/GYN in their state legislature to weigh in on the consequences of these bans. So we have legislators, many of them male, many of them conservative, who have no idea about how important expert care for at every point of the way for women during pregnancy and delivery is absolutely essential. But we want to change that, and we want to fight back. And we have some great speakers who will give us the most current information as to what's going on and what we can expect. Our first speaker is Laurel Sakai, and I hope I've got your name pronounced correctly, Laurel. She's National Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs at Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Prior to joining PPFA, Laurel served on the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions for Chair Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington. Previous to that, she served as General Counsel for on the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs and was then Senior Counsel for Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, and Legislative Assistant Counsel for Daniel K. Akaka of Hawaii. She is a graduate of the University of Virginia School of Law, holds a BA from the University of Southern California in Health and Humanities, and she's originally, you might guess, from Maui, Hawaii. Absolutely lovely hometown. So Laurel, please fill us in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan, and thank you everyone for being here. I am so honored to be invited to speak with you all about the many threats to reproductive rights. And I know that there are many ways that you could choose to spend your time these days, and a lot to learn about threats on so many things that we all hold dear. So really want to just thank you all for being here too. I've been asked to speak a bit today about the history of contraception, abortion, and Planned Parenthood. Some post-Roe threats, including the implementation of Project 2025, as well as actions Congress is working on And I'm going to wrap up by sharing some things that give me some hope in all of this. That's a lot to cover, so I'm planning to leave some time at the end for some questions and discussion, as well as my fellow speakers. So to start on the background and history here, Planned Parenthood is the nation's leading provider and advocate of high-quality, affordable sexual and reproductive health care for all people, as well as the nation's largest provider of sex education. With nearly 600 health centers across the country, Planned Parenthood organizations serve all patients with care and compassion, with respect and without judgment, striving to create equitable access to health care. Through health centers, programs in schools and communities, and online resources, Planned Parenthood is a trusted source of reliable education and information that allows people to make informed health decisions. We do all this because we care passionately about helping people lead healthier lives. In order to talk about the history of contraception in Planned Parenthood, it's hard to do that without talking about the very first birth control clinic, which was started in Brownsville, Brooklyn in 1916 by a nurse named Margaret Sanger. Her story is one that sheds light on so many of the threats we face today. She experienced her mother dying at the age of 50 of tuberculosis after having 11 children and multiple miscarriages. Her mother's story inspired Sanger to travel to Europe to study birth control methods at a time when educating people about birth control was illegal in the United States. On October 16, 1916, Sanger, together with her sister Ethel Byrne and activist Vanya Mindell, opened the country's first birth control clinic in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Women lined the block to get birth control information and advice. 9 days later, police raided the clinic and shut it down. All three women were charged with crimes related to sharing birth control information. Sanger refused to pay the fine and spent 30 days in jail, where she educated other inmates about birth control. These parts of her story, her perseverance, the dedication to education, are vital parts of the history of Planned Parenthood and of contraception in this country. However, she also believed in eugenics, an inherently racist and ableist ideology that labeled certain people unfit to have children. Unfortunately, this is therefore also a part of our history, and a part that Planned Parenthood, under the leadership of Alexis McGill Johnson, has chosen to reckon with. I'm going to read a little bit of an op-ed from Alexis because I think it speaks to the history not only of Planned Parenthood, but of reproductive rights in general. Sanger remains an influential part of our history and will not be erased. But as we tell the history of Planned Parenthood's founding, we must fully take responsibility for the harm that Sanger caused to generations of people with disabilities, the Black, Latino, Asian American, and Indigenous people. Sanger thought birth control would liberate women, and in so many ways it has. According to a University of Michigan study, the availability of the birth control pill is responsible for roughly a third of women's wage gains since the 1960s. Reassessing Sanger's history doesn't negate her feminist fight, but it does tarnish it. In the name of political expedience, she chose to engage white supremacists to further her cause. In doing that, she devalued and dehumanized people of color. We will no longer make excuses or apologize for Margaret Sanger's action, but we can't simply call her racist, scrub her from our history, and move on. We must examine how we have perpetuated her harms over the last century as an organization, an institution, and as individuals. So I want to acknowledge that reality as we do the work in the moment we find ourselves in to reflect on our history and apply what we have learned from it as we work to try to improve reproductive freedom for everyone. So with that history in mind, I want to talk a bit about how Planned Parenthood has been a part of many of the key developments in reproductive rights and healthcare access in this country. Planned Parenthood is very proud of the historical role it continues to play in making safe and effective family planning available to women and men around the world. In 1923, Sanger opened the Birth Control Clinical Research Bureau in Manhattan to provide birth control devices to women and to collect statistics about the safety and the long-term effectiveness of birth control. That same year, Sanger incorporated the American Birth Control League, an ambitious new organization that examined the global impact of population growth, disarmament, and famine. The two organizations eventually merged to become Planned Parenthood Federation of America. The efforts of birth control proponents led to a 1936 court ruling that birth control devices and information would no longer be classified as obscene and could be legally distributed in New York, Connecticut, and Vermont. While it took another 30 years for these rights to be extended to married couples, but just married couples to the rest of the country, it was a historic step towards making birth control available to everyone. In 1948, Planned Parenthood awarded a small grant to biologists Gregory Pincus, John Rock, and M.C. Chang to conduct research for the birth control pill. Catherine Dexter McCormick, a leader in the suffragette movement and League of Women Voters, was head of the research process and its primary funder. In 1956, the first large-scale human trial of the birth control pill was carried out in Puerto Rico. The step was critical to the pill's development at that time, but the testing conducted on Puerto Rican women was done without informed consent. As many as 1,500 Puerto Rican women participated in the trial. They were told only that the drug prevented pregnancy, not that the drug was experimental or that they might experience potentially dangerous side effects. The pills used in that trial had hormone levels 20 times higher than birth control pills on the market today. After this and other trials, the pill was refined to become the safe and effective birth control method used by millions of women today. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved the sale of pills for contraception on May 9, 1960. Within 5 years, 1 out of every 4 married women in the United States under the age of 45 had used the pill. The pill would soon change the lives of women and families across the U.S. and around the world as an easy, effective, and reversible way to prevent pregnancy. But the pill still wasn't available nationwide. Some states banned all forms of contraception. In 1965, the landmark case Griswold v. Connecticut, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that states couldn't deny the sale of contraception to married couples. That led 10 states to legalize birth control. 7 years later, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a Massachusetts law that banned the distribution of contraceptions to unmarried people. So by the early 70s, anyone, single or married, was allowed to get birth control from their doctor. In 1970, Title X of the Public Health Services Act became law. It established public funding for family planning and sex education programs in the United States. That meant Planned Parenthood and other reproductive health organizations were able to provide birth control and sex education for more people, especially in low-income communities. To this day, Title X funding is critical to assessing sexual and reproductive health care. By the early 1970s, the role of women in public life was starting to change, and a movement for safe and legal abortion emerged. In state after state, lawmakers changed laws to allow abortion in certain cases. After New York legalized abortion in 1970, a Planned Parenthood health center in Syracuse, New York, was the first Planned Parenthood center to offer abortion services. In 1973, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of abortion rights in the landmark case Roe v. Wade, citing the right to privacy. Roe v. Wade guaranteed the right to safe and legal abortion within the first 3 months of pregnancy in all 50 states. A short-lived but crucial era of abortion rights expansion followed. Laws requiring spousal consent for abortion and strict parental consent rules for minors seeking abortion were soon struck down in courts, removing harmful obstacles to abortion. However, in 1976, the Hyde Amendment made it illegal for people who get their health insurance through Medicaid to use their insurance to cover abortion, except in few circumstances, such as rape, incest, or life-endangering pregnancy. So even while abortion was legal, it was becoming out of reach for people with low incomes in need of financial assistance, or for those who receive health care through Medicaid or Medicare. Through legal victories and setbacks, Planned Parenthood continued to grow in its role as a trusted sexual and reproductive health care provider and educator, establishing affiliates in communities across the country and becoming a leading advocate in the fight for reproductive rights. The expansion of abortion rights in the 1970s resulted in fierce backlash from opponents of safe and legal abortion in the 1980s and 90s, with tragic consequences. Extremists staged campaigns of patient intimidation and committed acts of violence, including murder, against abortion providers, as well as bombings and arsons at health centers. Also, abortion opponents began gaining strong political influence. The Reagan and George H.W. Bush presidencies resulted in significant setbacks to the reproductive rights movement. In 1992, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutional right to an abortion, but allowed states to put their own regulations about abortion into place. Planned Parenthood v. Casey allowed states to put limits on abortion, such as mandatory waiting periods of more than 24 hours, that made it harder for patients to access abortion care. During this time, laws were passed that restricted federal funds from healthcare providers and organizations who discussed abortion with their patients, including the Title X gag rule and the Mexico City policy, or the global gag rule. In 1993, the Clinton administration reversed these rules, but it was not the last time the world would suffer from the global gag rule. But throughout these difficult times, Planned Parenthood remained steadfast in its commitment to patients and its vision in the world without barriers to sexual and reproductive health care. In 1987, Planned Parenthood began offering free or low-cost HIV testing in communities around the country. In 1989, millions marched in Washington, D.C. in support of reproductive rights. That same year, Planned Parenthood Federation of America President Faye Wattleton founded the Planned Parenthood Action Fund, a 501c4 organization to engage in public education campaigns, grassroots organizing, and legislative and electoral advocacy. Throughout the 1990s, Planned Parenthood and other reproductive health experts successfully advocated for FDA approval of new effective methods of birth control, including the birth control shot, the ring, the patch, and the implant. In 1999, FDA approved Plan B emergency contraception, and Planned Parenthood began work to make emergency contraception widely available in its health centers and educate the public about emergency contraception, known also as the morning after pill. In 2000, the FDA approved mifepristone, known as medication abortion or the abortion pill, after several years of delay due to political opposition. Planned Parenthood health centers were then able to offer another safe and effective option to patients seeking abortion. And my colleague Kirsten is going to talk a little bit more about both emergency contraception and abortion after I'm done. In 2005, the first Planned Parenthood affiliate began providing hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, for transgender patients. In 2006, the HPV vaccine was approved, and Planned Parenthood health centers began providing this life-saving cancer prevention method at health centers across the country. That same year, Plan B became available for purchase without a prescription for women ages 18 plus. In 2013, Plan B and similar brands became available over the counter for people of all ages. And in 2023, the first over-the-counter hormonal birth control pill was approved, making birth control pills available over the counter can help bridge gaps in access and give people greater control over their health and lives. But these advances were tempered by a political climate increasingly hostile to reproductive health care. The George W. Bush administration reinstated the global gag rule, galvanized abortion opponents by passing a ban on a rarely used later stage abortion procedure, and working to establish a new legal status for frozen embryos. Funding for abstinence-only programs increased, leaving students across the country without medically accurate sexual health information. In 2009, the Obama administration overturned the global gag rule and reaffirmed America's commitment to sexual and reproductive health at home and abroad. President Trump later rescinded the gag rule during his presidency, and President Biden reinstated it in November 2021. And then Trump once again reinstated it in January of 2025. Damage from the first Trump gag rule was significant and reduced the number of patients served by the program from over 4 million in 2017 to 1.5 million in 2020. In 2010, the Affordable Care Act was passed. It expanded access to health insurance, allowing more people to get the health care they needed. The law includes a provision that requires insurance plans to cover birth control and preventive care services, like cancer screenings and STD testing. Planned Parenthood has worked to educate over 300,000 people about the new health insurance law, helping them get coverage. After years of state-by-state restrictions on abortion, in 2016, the Supreme Court ruled that states could not create rules that placed an undue burden on people seeking abortion in the Whole Women's Health v. Hellerstedt case, a victory for those in favor of safe and legal abortion. However, new Supreme Court justices with different values took away those protections in the coming years. One of the first indications that the U.S. Supreme Court would allow states to ban abortion was its reaction to a near-total Texas abortion ban, SB 8, that went into effect in September 1st, 2021. The law banned abortion at around 6 weeks of pregnancy and allowed people across the country to sue anyone who helped someone in Texas get an abortion after 6 weeks, including doctors, partners, friends, family members, or abortion fund volunteers. The law forces the courts to give the person suing at least $10,000 in damages. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to block Texas SB 8 numerous times and finally ruled that federal courts are powerless to block this kind of citizens-enforced law, despite its blatant attack on then-established constitutional rights. Then, on Friday, June 24th, 2022, the Supreme Court issued its ruling in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, overturning Roe v. Wade and ending the federal constitutional right to abortion. Some states moved quickly to ban some or all abortion, with 20 states currently banning some or all abortion and throwing patients and providers into a devastating new reality. Planned Parenthood had been preparing for this moment since 2017 and had plans in place to maximize the number of patients who could get care and get people information they needed as access to abortion changed rapidly. Planned Parenthood is focused on increasing the capacity of affiliates in states where abortion is legal to support patients who are forced to travel for abortion care and expanding patient navigation services. All of these moments in our history, the transitions from more access to less access and back, are a part of what we are seeing now as we see the implementation of Project 2025 through the Trump administration. On April 21st, 2023, the Heritage Foundation published its Project 2025 Mandate for Leadership Policy Agenda, or Project 2025, which contained hundreds of policy plans for an incoming hostile administration to implement that would further obstruct access to abortion and sexual and reproductive health care for millions of people nationwide. Of note, numerous former Trump officials contributed to Project 2025, including Russell Vought, former and now again current director of the Office of Management and Budget, who is the chief architect of these policy goals. I'm going to focus on a few policy threats where we've seen action from opponents of sexual and reproductive health over the past year. And to start with where they started, which was to counter what anti-abortion advocates often claim about what they were doing here, which is returning decisions regarding abortion to the states. Project 2025 calls on the administration to eliminate abortion access for more people nationwide, including for people who live in states where abortion is legal. This includes efforts to block states from requiring abortion coverage in their private and state Medicaid plans, weakening HIPAA privacy protections for patients and providers, as well as weaponizing the CDC's public health database to require states to track and report out the number of abortions that take place within their borders. Additionally, there's been as of last week, there has been a court decision partially blocking the EMTALA Act and additional threats to the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or the FACE Act. Additional efforts that were named in Project 2025 that the Trump administration has been undertaking have been to reinstate the expanded version of the global gag rule, as well as to empower providers and pharmacists to refuse to provide gender-affirming care to patients who are seeking abortion care, birth control, gender-affirming care, and in vitro fertilization. Furthermore, there have been efforts to remove references to abortion, as well as change and restructure the comprehensive sex education programs that were expanded and supported during the Biden administration. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about what is happening right now in the U.S. Senate in the form of the budget reconciliation vehicle that Senate Republicans are now trying to pass. What that is trying to do now is to defund Planned Parenthood. And all of the great gains that I talked about, all the work that Planned Parenthood has done over the years, from birth control to abortion to gender-affirming care to sex education, would all be threatened if this bill is enacted. If Planned Parenthood is defunded, nearly 200 Planned Parenthood health centers in 24 states across the country are at risk of closure, potentially eliminating 1 in 4 abortion providers nationwide. More than 90% of those closures would occur in states where abortion is protected and legal. And that's always been the goal of anti-abortion rights lawmakers and their backers. And this effort to defund would make it harder for everyone everywhere to get an abortion. Plain and simple, this big ugly bill is a backdoor abortion ban. I do also want to talk a little bit about what gives me hope, because as they fight so hard, we are also fighting back. And what we know is that people want access to sexual and reproductive health care at Planned Parenthood, which is how we know there's also a better tomorrow. Adults overwhelmingly support and trust Planned Parenthood and support the organization's mission. More than 3/4 of Americans, 77%, have a favorable view of Planned Parenthood, with the strongest support among women, adults under 35, and Black, Latino, and AAPI communities. The majority of Americans want access to abortion care, birth control, and IVF. Axios found that 8 in 10 Americans, including 2/3 of Republicans, agree that the government shouldn't be involved in how a woman manages abortion issues. We know we are the majority, and we aren't going anywhere. The Planned Parenthood movement is 19 million people strong and will keep growing. We also know when people have the choice, they choose reproductive freedom. Abortion was the defining issue of the 2024 election, with reproductive freedom ballot measures winning in 7 states, where voters enshrined abortion rights in their state constitutions. And the momentum to safeguard access to sexual and reproductive health didn't end in November. We continue to see actions by governors and legislative bodies to protect and even expand access to care nationwide. As of June 2025, over 360 bills aimed at protecting and expanding access to abortion have been filed. These bills have been introduced across 45 states and include increased funding for abortion, expanding insurance coverage, or enacting shield protections for abortion providers. Hundreds of additional bills have also been introduced to protect and expand access to contraception, fertility care, and maternal health. We are in the thick of the fight to beat back attacks by the Trump administration on sexual and reproductive health care across access. Still, we know that we have to use this time to think proactively and lay the groundwork for a better, more inclusive sexual and reproductive health care system. In the midst of our Fight Back campaign, we continue to build out a future federal agenda for sexual and reproductive health, including abortion and contraception, so that we can hit the ground running when there is a federal opportunity. We are working towards a world where people can achieve bodily autonomy and access the care that they need from the provider of their choice, regardless of their gender, race, immigration status, and ability to pay. And we won't stop until we get there.
Thank you so much. It was just a wonderful overview of Planned Parenthood's history and the history of contraception, which is so important in our country. I don't see any questions or comments. Maybe they'll come through a little later in the program. And if you can stick around for a while, Lauren, we can return to those after Kirsten speaks. And for our viewers, please do use the chat to either make a statement or ask a question. Well, our next speaker is somebody I've known for a while. She is just one of these incredible feminists who is a take charge person with a smile. We need more people like Kirsten Moore. She is the director of Expanding Medication Abortion Access, EMAA project, if you were wondering what the acronym stood for. This is a project which seeks to improve the way that medications prescribed for abortion care are dispensed in the United States. That would be in a consistent with the medical and scientific evidence information. Kirsten is a graduate of Princeton University with a master's degree in public affairs. And she's worked for a series of very pioneering public policy and advocacy organizations over the years, including president of Reproductive Health Technologies Project, program manager on gender, family, and development with the Population Council, consultant with Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and director of partnerships for Everytown for Gun Safety, just to name a few. So, Kirsten, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Jan. I appreciate the invitation. Yes, it's been a while. We're still doing this. Can't believe we're still doing this.
That's all these years.
I'm going to really focus in on the promise and the threats of access to medication abortion care. But if people have questions or comments about the fight to bring Plan B over the counter, that was also something I was very actively involved in, and have a lot of plot points in that story. So feel free to drop those in the chat. But in the meantime, so you might have seen some news yesterday. The Society of Family Planning is, continuing. They've got their We Count data, right? This is tracking the numbers of abortions and where those abortions are happening and what kinds of abortions, medication abortion, or procedural abortion. And they published the latest update yesterday. And what we know is that as of now, more than almost 2/3 of all abortions in the United States are medication abortion. 63% are medication abortion. And almost a quarter of all abortions in the United States are provided through telehealth services, right? So you as a patient connect with a licensed prescriber, answer some questions about your healthcare, your state of pregnancy, et cetera. And then that prescriber can either write a prescription for you to go pick up in your local pharmacy, depending on which state you live in, and we can get into those details as well. Or they can send that prescription into a mail order pharmacy, which will deliver it to you. Or Laurel referred to Shield providers. Those are providers who are operating in states that have enacted legislation that says, hey, you're licensed to practice here in Illinois. And typically that means you see patients in Illinois. But if you want to see patients in other states like Alabama, Mississippi, Oklahoma, states where abortion access has been banned, we will let you see people in those states, and we won't prosecute you, and we will defend you if other states want to come prosecute you. So that's Shield law provision and telehealth. And so that's how actually the abortion rate continues to be about the same as it is even pre-Dobbs. We are now able to provide care to people in states where abortion is banned. It's not an ideal solution. I think all of us would prefer you be able to go into your own healthcare provider, have your conversation, consultation, et cetera, talk with that provider, get the prescription, and be able to talk with your own doctor again as you're going through the process of your questions. But in the meantime, we do have this service delivery model that is really helping to meet the need in the current moment. So we're very excited about that. That being said, our opposition will stop at nothing to put mifepristone back under lock and key. And I should say medication abortion involves two medications. The first is mifepristone, which shuts down the hormones that are necessary to continue a pregnancy. And the second is misoprostol, which creates cramping and bleeding so the body can expel that pregnancy. So the opposition, misoprostol has been used off-label for all kinds of gynecologic needs and indications, throughout the course of pregnancy, including helping to ripen the cervix to deliver a healthy baby. But mifepristone was specifically approved by FDA back in 2000 specifically for the use of early pregnancy termination. FDA put some restrictions on how that medication can be delivered. They've been examined and re-examined over time. And again, right now, the healthcare providers can see patients virtually or in person, and then write a prescription, and the prescription gets filled at a local pharmacy or filled by mail. Okay, so that is driving the opposition crazy, right? They did the thing, they did Dobbs. The abortion rate should be going down, and it's not. So they are, as I said, throwing everything at the wall to try to put mifepristone back under lock and key. They are coming at it through legislation, through litigation, and through regulation. Through legislation, there's a whole bunch of stuff that, and I'm going to actually take the moment to drop this link. Sorry, I'm great at multitasking. Drop this link in the chat. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's been introduced both on Capitol Hill and in state legislatures, as Laurel alluded to try to restrict mifepristone or put it under lock and key, or say they did this in Louisiana last year when they scheduled mifepristone and misoprostol, said we have to treat them as controlled substances. But basically on the federal side, on the Hill side, a lot of legislators are standing behind BS science. They're pretending that mifepristone is not safe and effective, and saying, oh, FDA, you need to reintroduce this, or you have to re-examine this. And Josh Hawley, senator from Missouri, is really kind of at the forefront of that effort. So the link that I put in the chat, I'm going to talk about All 50 in a moment, but it includes, as you scroll down onto the resources, we're just tracking the junk science junkyard policy graveyard. Again, the kind of worst example of the kind of legislation that lawmakers are introducing to put MIFI back under lock and key. As Laurel mentioned, Project 2025 also has a little bit of a playbook about how to restrict access to mifepristone. And one of the things they talk about doing is reinstating, or enforcing rather, the Comstock Act, right? Law that was passed in 1873 to criminalize the mailing of pornographic materials, which at the time was deemed to include contraception and abortifacients, which anyway, but so Comstock still on the books, but hasn't been enforced to interfere with the delivery of mifepristone, but it could be under this administration. Litigation. Again, if you go to the All 50 website, you'll see toward the bottom a fact sheet about, so a couple of years ago, we were all paying attention to the Alliance for, as I insist on calling them, hypocritical medicine, to FDA and say, hey, you got the initial approval of mifepristone wrong, therefore you have to take it off the market. That case went all the way up to, it was filed in front of Judge Kaczmarek, a known anti-choice judge in Amarillo, Texas, specifically filed by, as it happens, Josh Hawley's wife. And that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court dismissed that case because they said the Alliance for Hypocritical Medicine, which is not practicing medication abortion care, does not have the right to sue on those grounds. Okay, so that case went away, but in the meantime, 3 attorneys general from Kansas, Missouri, and Idaho have filed a new brief in front of Kaczmarek, Judge Kaczmarek, and said, hey, we have standing, or we believe we have standing. We want to sue FDA because FDA removed the in-person distribution requirement in a pre-Dobbs world. We're now in a post-Dobbs world, and people in our state are still getting abortions, even though we think it should be illegal. Asterisk Kansas and Missouri, which actually have voter initiatives that said, oh no, actually we want abortion to be safe, legal, and accessible in our state. Okay, but that case is still pending in front of Judge Kaczmarek. This Department of Justice, the Trump Department of Justice, recently filed a brief in that case saying they don't think those attorneys general should have standing in the case. They didn't get into the merits of the argument at all. They just said they wanted that the states shouldn't be able to sue federal government, especially in, why are you bringing this litigation in Texas? It should be in other states. So we're kind of waiting to see what happens next in that case. So that's legislation, litigation, and then regulation. right? FDA regulates the safety or the accessibility of mifepristone, and there has been a lot of pressure recently put on FDA, especially in this, again, administration, to revisit the restrictions. Again, a lot of that pressure is coming from Josh Hawley, and certainly the folks behind Project 2025, Leonard Leo, Students for Life, all those kinds of usual suspects. Again, they're leaning into bullshit science. Sorry, there's no other way to describe it. No known facts to say, oh, wait, Miffy really isn't that safe. It should be put back under lock and key. What I can say, because I had a brief stint, among other things, I actually got tired of all the high pressure stuff and then went to sit in Pew Charitable Trusts for about a year, managing a portfolio of FDA related policy. Then I was bored out of my mind, so I came back into the hot stuff. But managing that program at Pew, I got to know how FDA works and how it functions. And it is a huge bureaucracy, 16,000, probably now down to 13,000 employees, fewer than 10 of whom are political appointees, right? They are lawyers, they are medical reviewers, they are scientists, they are admin people. They put their heads down, they look at the data, and they decide what's safe and effective, and then try to move forward with that. So there's been noise from RFK Jr., about, yes, McCary has to relook at this. And McCary has said, he's been in front of Congress committees and Congress oversight hearings multiple occasions. Yes, of course, FDA will always look at the science, but he's also actually rejected again, I'm just going to go to the epic piece of shit that the Ethics and Public Policy Center, the latest science, quote, science that they tried to submit. And Commissioner McCary has said that is not peer review science. I know peer review science. I wrote 250 peer review articles. So we're not falling for that. So there's, the potential threat of something that FDA or HHS could do. But in my opinion, based on what I'm seeing, based on what I'm hearing, I don't think they're doing it yet. I don't think they're doing it. That doesn't mean that if Trump turned around and said to Kennedy or McCary, you've got to do something on this, that either one of them would not obey. They would kiss his ring right away and do it. So that is why we at Emma are standing behind MIFI in all 50 states, one standard for medication abortion care. And I hope that you will take a minute to go to that link in the website and click on the message, send a message to President Trump saying, don't go here. Do not fall for this BS science. Do not restrict access to a method of abortion that has been used for more than 25 years, that is used at 10 weeks or less in pregnancy, right? And that, I feel, is, we just have to keep sending that bat signal into his feral brain so that he knows not to touch this, especially going into a mid-year election. This would be a very unpopular look. So I want us to be, as a broad movement in kind of forward stance mode, in offense, not just defense, but offense, saying, don't come for this, right? Absolutely stand down. So I hope you'll take a minute to look at that, to check it out. Happy to answer other questions about mifepristone. Miffy is also used to treat miscarriage because, again, it's the same physiological process that's happening. So we hope that there will be more work to come in that front. Can talk about some state stuff if you want, but I'll open it up for questions right now.
Okay, great. Well, we do have one question, Kirsten, from Denise Bayer, Dr. Denise Bayer, I might add, a friend of mine and a neighbor. Are either Planned Parenthood or EMAA working in coalition with other groups? This seems especially critical given, one, the lack of majority support for recent policy changes, and two, the multiple policy shifts in every sector that fritters away reform energies but increases potential allies around good governance and equity. Wow, that is a mouthful, Denise, but I'm sure Kirsten can answer that.
Well, and also Laurel, because I know Planned Parenthood is working
And Laurel.
a lot of other groups as well. Yes, we are. I will, the Emma is in fact one staff person, me. So limited outreach, but we're trying. We are on the Miffy and All 50. We're working with some other groups like Indivisible, Red Wine and Blue, Men for Choice. These are groups that are getting this message out, promoting this campaign or this platform to their members. So we're excited about that. I will also say that Emma, we're not doing it right now because as you note in your question, the world is in fact on fire. But we have collaborated with others. We have an interest again in FDA's preemption authority. And so when the Alliance for Hypocritical Medicine lawsuit came forward, an attorney that we're working with on preemption litigation in North Carolina took the lead in writing an amicus brief in the AHM case on behalf of 350 plus pharma execs saying, hey, don't go here. Do not undo what FDA has done. That would set an incredibly bad precedent. The brief, said mifepristone once. I don't think it used the word abortion, but it did talk about FDA's authority and regulatory, effectiveness, et cetera, and not wanting to see that undermined. We've also, speaking again on behalf of Emma, have worked with the pharmacies in helping to set up their certified pharmacy programs. So Walmart, Walgreens and CVS in particular. So we have some of those collaborations behind the scenes, but I will be honest and say right now, everything is on fire. And so people are looking out for their own stuff.
Great.
Yeah. Do you want to add?
Thanks, Kirsten. I should add that there are really several major reproductive rights coalitions that have been working for decades in this country. We all communicate by email or coalition meetings frequently and keep everybody informed and activated as to the latest emergency or the latest good news. Of course, we want more of that. And now has been a part where I work, has been a part of several coalitions really over the last 30, 40 years. I should also like to add a footnote to history. I don't know, Kirsten, if you know this, but our former national president, Ellie Smeal, now with the Feminist Majority, and Pei Yorkin, a critical funder for the feminist movement, and others went to Europe back in the 80s when we first heard about RU 486. That might be a term that rings a few older bells among us longtime feminists. And we're very instrumental in getting agreement with the manufacturers of RU 486, which is mifepristone and misoprostol. Sorry if I sort of murdered those names, but anyway, abortion medication to bring it to the United States. Well, it took more than 20 years to get here. So, we've been fighting ever since to keep that available to American women. And prior to it coming to the United States in 2020, it had been available around the world and used in many, many countries very safely for many years. So it's just really appalling that we are having to fight these battles over and over and over again. I don't want to end on a negative note like that. I would like people to be energized by these talks because we can win in the end. So any conclusions or suggestions, Kirsten, as to what our next steps might be?
Yeah, please. Again, I'm just going to say, please check out Miffy and All 50 and send the message to Trump. Recent state legislative initiatives to preserve access. So there is, I flipped with that. Okay. So in general, we believe, speaking again on behalf of Emma, that FDA has been given the authority by Congress, has been delegated the authority by Congress to regulate the safety and effectiveness of medicine, of medications, of medical products, et cetera. States have the right to regulate the practice of medicine and the practice of pharmacy. But in our North Carolina litigation, we brought a suit on behalf of Dr. Amy Bryant, who's a certified prescriber in that state, obstetrician gynecologist. And she challenged the state laws that the North Carolina legislature had enacted, which said only an obstetrician gynecologist could prescribe mifepristone. And that obstetrician gynecologist had to be the person who handed the pill to the patient. And the patient had to take the pill in the clinic, had to take mifepristone in the clinic and come back and take misoprostol in the clinic. We brought that case in North Carolina. We originally sued Josh Stein. He actually joined our side of the case, and his successor is also on our side of the case. And we won in North Carolina. We are now up on appeal in Fourth Circuit. So kind of we are reading this preemption stuff really closely. We collaborate, talk with the governors in blue states that are trying to do everything they can to ensure that Miffy will continue to be available. But at the end of the day, I don't think that the states in and of themselves will be able to, manufacture Miffy if FDA shuts down that distribution. But again, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think it won't happen in part because we're all going to lean in and say, hey, don't go here.
Great. And that answer was in response to a question from Duverne Gaines with the Feminist Majority Foundation's National Clinic Access Project, which is a very important long-running effort by the feminist majority. Karen Humphrey writes, I see the coalition work growing since Trump returned to office, but I'm concerned that choice and/or women's issues in general may not always be a priority when other coalition members are focused on immigration, war, economics, taxes, etc. How do we make sure we don't get sidelined, as this has happened over and over again in the history of women's progress? Boy, that's certainly a very long discussion, but maybe you can make a comment, Kirsten.
And I really do want Laurel to chime in here too, because, but I will just say that that's part of why we're doing Miffy in all 50, right? We did focus groups with voters right after the election, what I would call lower information voters, Arizona, Nevada, Minnesota, Michigan and Pennsylvania, some of whom supported Trump, but some of whom also voted for, those same voters voted for ballot initiatives on abortion rights. What I took away from those discussions, what I heard in those conversations was, yes, people support abortion rights, but their needs in the moment will trump their support of rights at any point. So we have to be very, very, very concrete about how we talk about these issues right now. And that's why we're leaning into this again, FDA approved Miffy. Like, wait a minute, politicians are going to put a ban on your the medicines that are in your medicine cabinet. Politicians are going to put a ban on your ability to talk to your doctor. Like, people don't think they're going to need an abortion, but they can imagine needing medication and wanting to get access to medication. So that's part of what's inspiring the Miffy in all 50 tagline.
Great, thank you so much. Connie suggested that we
If
ask,
would it be okay if I jumped in on the coalition
yeah.
question a little bit too? If that's all right, just because I did want to note, I definitely agree with seeing the coalition work growing more with Trump returning to office. I wanted to just say that I am here because of the work that my partnerships team at Planned Parenthood does within the women's groups, but then also with the work that we do across cross-movement partners as well. So there's a number of coalitions that we sit in that focus on immigration, that focus on democracy, that focus on these bigger issues. I will say we're not so much in the war spaces, but I think that there are places that are really bringing people together, and that work has been ongoing. It hasn't been as, I think, visual or public in under other administrations, but there is kind of the background in place for folks to be working together, and we've been really trying to make sure that we're lifting up all of the issues that threaten our freedoms and threaten our rights. Because as Kirsten noted, when people are thinking about what's right in front of them, they are also looking at what they're being told to be afraid of. They're being told to be afraid that their neighbor is the reason that they can't afford their food, that everything is bad because it's someone else's fault. So our ability to stay together and to make it clear that we will keep fighting is really important. So there have been, especially over the past few weeks with this Republican reconciliation bill, a number of efforts across different coalition partners raising up the different ways in which sort of this bill is bad for everyone, because there's pieces that are really bad on Medicaid for people with mixed immigration status. There's obviously the defund Planned Parenthood provision that is really bad and terrible. And the work requirements that will hit everyone. I've been speaking with some folks that work in the domestic workers space, and some of the people most likely to get hit by the problems with the work requirements are the healthcare workers, especially home health workers, and people who are in childcare, those sorts of pieces. So making sure that we're taking opportunities to lift all that up, I think, helps to make sure that we aren't sidelined, because we can show that we're showing up for other folks as well, and we can tell the narrative across why all of these harms are bad for everyone.
Great. And we've been asked by Connie, and I don't really know that there's an awful lot of time left to talk about legislation. Are there any positive, proactive bills, just a couple that you can think of? If not, we can certainly send that information out to folks later. Laurel.
Yeah, I was just going to search into my email because I know there was a number of things that people were planning to actually introduce into Congress today in light of the anniversary. So I was kind of hoping that I might be able to find some of these pieces, but right now I will also again note that kind of a lot of the focus has been on this Republican reconciliation bill and fighting back against that. That is to say, I believe one of the pieces I think that has been introduced is the My Body, My Data Act, which has been in process for a little while now, which folks might be familiar with, but focusing on some of the privacy provisions, the privacy issues, particularly as we see some of the horrible things around law enforcement behaving, I believe, inappropriately, and coming after information, coupled with sort of what we've seen in terms of data breaches and stuff in the federal government itself. I think the importance of privacy, and when you think about sort of the ability to travel, the ability to get the healthcare you need, whether it is reproductive healthcare or other forms of healthcare, when you have state actors who are focused on undermining that care and going after all aspects of things, I will just say there's again, another reason for MIFI in all 50. But when you're seeing efforts from states that are trying to protect our rights be undermined by the ability of state actors who are trying to harm us, that the ability to get into our phones, the ability to see our medical records, those sorts of things are even more powerful and more scary, in my opinion, than how things potentially were, before Roe, the last time we didn't have a federal right.
Right. Well, we can look at the end of the day and see what bills have been introduced on this horrible anniversary and get that information sent around to folks. In the meantime, I want to thank you, Laurel and Kirsten, for really terrific presentations. These are tough subjects we're talking about, and we very much appreciate your expertise and your inclination to share all the pertinent information with us to be able to move forward and protect women's access to reproductive health care.